Now CNN's Anderson Cooper on assignment for 60 Minutes.
Much of the attention on Iran over the last few years has focused on its mysterious nuclear program. But another mystery that's received far less attention is torture in Iran's prisons. It's a story the Iranian government doesn't want you to hear. A story the man you'll meet tonight risked his life to tell. His name is Ahmad Batebi, and quite by accident, he became one of the most famous dissidents in Iran. He says he endured years of torture in an Iranian prison after his picture appeared on the cover of The Economist magazine. He escaped from Iran last year, and tonight he'll tell us how. A warning, though, some of the pictures in this story are disturbing.
To escape from Iran, Ahmad Batebi was smuggled by car and then by donkey through mountains and minefields. He documented the dangerous journey on his cell phone camera. The men helping him are from an underground Kurdish group, and they're taking him into Iraq. Ahmad Batebi never intended to be a famous dissident. He wanted to be a photojournalist, but it was a picture of him that changed his life and almost got him killed. Back in July 1999, demonstrations rocked Tehran. Outraged by a government crackdown on dissent, students took to the streets. Batebi, a film major at Tehran University, joined in. When police fired into the crowd, a student standing next to him was hit.
The bullet hit the wall and ricocheted back into my friend's shoulder. I heard the bullet go by my face.
You actually heard the bullet go by you?
Yes, it sounded like a bumblebee going by my ear.
Trying to help, Batebi took his friend's shirt off.
To put pressure on the wound, it was bleeding, and so I tried to use his shirt to keep the blood in. Then we took him to the medical facility.
After helping his friend, Batebi returned to the protest and waved the bloody shirt to show what police had done. That's when a photographer took this picture. It appeared on the cover of The Economist and was seen around the world. Just days after that picture appeared, the government arrested him.
They took me to a special prison for intelligence, and I was in solitary confinement for several months. After 7 or 8 months, we went to court, but they didn't tell me where we were going. I was blindfolded, and I thought this was just part of my questioning. They sat me in a room and opened my blindfold.
That's when a judge showed him The Economist.
When you saw the magazine, was that the first time you'd seen it?
The first time.
He says the judge told him, with this picture, you've signed your own death sentence.
He said, "You have defaced the face of the Islamic Republic that is a representative of God on earth. You've defaced it around the world, and therefore you have to be sentenced to death." It took less than 3 minutes.
He was held here in the notorious Evin prison, which we could only photograph secretly from our hotel window. Batebi says he spent 17 months in solitary confinement, trapped in a tiny cell not much bigger than a bathtub.
They kept the light on 24 hours a day. You have no information about the outside. You have no contact with the outside. And after a while, you become mentally disoriented. This kind of torture doesn't affect you physically, but it does affect you mentally and emotionally.
It can drive you crazy.
Yes.
Psychological torture is one thing, physical torture another. And Batebi says there was plenty of that, too.
They kicked me in the teeth and broke them. There was a toilet that was stopped up with feces. They put my head into the toilet.
And they beat you with cables?
Yes.
On what, on your feet?
On the bottom of my feet and my back.
I read that they beat your testicles? And how long would this go on for?
This happened the whole time I was in solitary confinement. It also happened at other times.
This is a sadistic government that uses various methods that are increasingly and exceedingly cruel and abhorring.
Lily Mazahiri is an Iranian-American attorney who helps Iranian dissidents get asylum here. Iran denies having any political prisoners, but she and human rights groups say there are actually hundreds of them. Though she can't prove Batebi's account of torture, she believes him because she knows other prisoners who've also been tortured.
Why torture? I mean, what's the purpose of torture in Iran?
To get these prisoners to say things that the regime wants them to say. In Ahmad Batebi's case, for example, they wanted him to say that the blood on the shirt that he held up was not really blood.
That it was a prop, that it was a...
Yes, that it was, everything from tomato sauce to blood of, a sheep or what have you.
Batebi says he refused to say that or betray his fellow student activists despite all the torture.
They also used sleep deprivation against you, kept you up day and night.
Yes.
And they hung you from the ceiling with your hands tied behind your back.
At least 5 or 6 times they did this.
Batebi told us he never knew which days he'd be tortured or which technique they'd use. Once, he says, they cut him and rubbed salt in his wounds.
I hadn't slept for maybe 72 hours. I couldn't think clearly. I was drooling. I wanted to sleep, but they would slap me to keep me awake. In the final hours, when even the slapping wouldn't keep me up, they cut my arms and hands and put salt in my wounds so the burning would keep me awake.
One day, he says he heard his mother's voice outside his cell. He didn't know back then that it was just an audio tape.
I would hear her voice and I would say, in this place where there's all this torture and all this pain, they've arrested my mother also? And maybe she's in the prison cell next to me or across from me. And of course, this really bothered me a lot.
Human rights groups don't know how much torture takes place in Iran's prisons. But 3 years ago, Iran's judiciary did publicly admit that torture was used to extract confessions. Ahmad Batebi told us that several times during his torture, he wished he would die, and a few times he thought he was going to.
You thought they were going to hang you.
They told me to stand on a stool. 2 other people were on stools, one to my left, one to my right, and they put a rope around our necks, and they said, "You have a death sentence, and you will be executed." And then they kicked away the other 2 stools. The other 2 people were hanging, and their feet turned blue, and they died. I was still on my stool. I was shaking all over.
Why would they take you to a place and make you think that they were going to hang you and hang people on either side of you?
It's part of the torture that they use to get a confession or to convince people not to commit another crime.
Public hangings in Iran are especially cruel. Instead of a quick drop to break their neck, the doomed are lifted up by a crane so they suffocate slowly. Human rights activists say these 2 teenage boys were executed for being gay, but Iran's government says they raped a child. Iran executed more than 300 people last year, second only to China. The vast majority of executions were by slow hanging, but Iran still has the occasional death by stoning, the prescribed punishment for women convicted of adultery.
Someone is literally buried in the ground, their hands tied, their bodies wrapped.
Right, yes.
They're only basically their head, their neck, part of their shoulders exposed.
Right.
And they're stoned to death.
Yes.
Stoned to death with rocks trucked in by the government to make sure they're just the right size.
The reason for that is they can't be too large, so they would not bring about death too quickly, and they can't be too small, that they will not inflict enough pain.
It's not just to kill them, it's to make them suffer before
Absolutely.
they die. I've read accounts of mutilations
Yes.
used as a form of punishment.
Right. For example, to cut off the right hand and the left foot of someone, or gouging people's eyes out.
They gouge people's eyes out.
Yes.
It's a sign to others that they have in some way offended the state.
Absolutely. It's as if they were to wear a scarlet letter forever around their necks.
The Islamic Penal Code includes a number of punishments which are torture under international law, such as flogging, amputations, and stoning.
Hadi Gayemi told us he's documented the cases of 45 Iranian prisoners who were tortured. Based in New York, he leads a group called the International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran. He says mistreatment of detainees by the United States makes it harder to pressure Iran to stop torturing its prisoners.
The work of human rights defenders worldwide is made so difficult and almost impossible in holding governments like Iran accountable or shaming them as long as we have torture in places like Guantanamo.
Iran denies that it tortures prisoners. An Iranian official who did not want to be identified told us there are no types of torture used on prisoners. 3 years ago, when Iran's judiciary admitted that torture was used to extract confessions, they'd promised it would stop. But but human rights groups say it has not.
No, not at all. Right now, all the testimonies that we collect talk about people being forced to make confessions, false confessions.
The irony of Ahmad Batebi's case is that the same picture which got him sentenced to death may have also saved his life.
The fact that your photo had been seen around the world put pressure on the Iranian government in some ways to keep you alive.
Yes, this was also a result. This was a good thing that happened as well.
A very good thing.
His death sentence was reduced to 15 years, but after 9 years, he began having seizures. Last spring, he was released temporarily for medical treatment. That's when he decided to make a run for it, documenting his 3-day journey from Tehran to Iraq on his cell phone camera. His attorney says she convinced her White House contacts to allow him to enter the U.S. for humanitarian reasons. He lives in Washington now, working in radio for Voice of America, trying to adjust to a new country, a new life, trying to make sure that the others still in prison are not forgotten.
Do you feel free now?
No, I don't feel free. I have a responsibility to the people imprisoned in Iran whose human rights are being violated. I have to get their message out. And it's a big responsibility that doesn't leave one free. But to an extent, I do feel free. I live in a free country, and I've left prison.
So your body is free, but your heart is not.
That's exactly the way it is.